Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Science is a team sport, right? It's not about an individual doing something on their own, in a dark lab somewhere, particularly in clinical research, outcomes, health services kind of space. And I really, really feel lucky to have wonderful collaborators in support in the work that I'm doing. There are at least 3 service members that are home today with their families that would not be here if I hadn't been there. So that is a deeply satisfying thing to have been a part of. I always try to tell people that I think it's important to keep an open mind, because you may have spent every ounce of energy up to a certain point focused in one area, but there may be something else that may be related, it may be synergistic, or it may be totally different. But I think it's important to sort of maintain that mindset. I think, like with anything else, whether you're young or old, white or Asian or black, gay, trans, whatever, if you can prove yourself and you can do the work that you are assigned or set out to do, then those things shouldn't matter.
Hey, it's Faye, and welcome to Feisworld. This is my world and also yours. Most of the guests on our show are people right around us. Sure, some of them have appeared on TED Talk, performed in a circus, or saved lives, such as our guest today. They aren't out there in the public eye because they're so busy doing what they do. Therefore, I thought, why don't I just create something to celebrate their contribution to the world? Trust me, for nearly 3 years, this has been the most rewarding thing I have ever done. And it's ongoing and addictive. Today, I have Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld with me on the show. Dr. Ehrenfeld is board certified in both anesthesiology and clinical informatics. He was trained at the Massachusetts General Hospital right here in Boston and finished his fellowship there in October 2010. Today, Dr. Ehrenfeld lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and works for Vanderbilt University as a professor of anesthesiology, surgery, biomedical informatics, and health policy. I know, that's a mouthful. In 2014, Dr. Ehrenfeld was elected to the American Medical Association Board of Trustees, where he has the honor and also privilege of serving as the voice of all physicians across our nation. The list goes on, really. Dr. Ehrenfeld could have easily been the person I chat with while questioning my own existence and accomplishment. You know what I mean, right? We've all felt that way at some point in our lives. He was not only easy to talk to, but also shared some of his life-changing experiences in the military not so long ago. On April 7th, 2008, Ehrenfeld was commissioned as a lieutenant in the Naval Reserve. And in 2014, Ehrenfeld was called to active duty and served a tour in Afghanistan at the NATO Role 3 Multinational Medical Unit, where he was constantly relied upon to care for wounded U.S. service members and coalition forces. A longtime advocate for patients, equality, and LGBT health, Dr. Ehrenfeld made international headlines on February 22, 2015, when he asked the newly appointed Secretary of Defense, Ashton his stance on letting transgender individuals serve in the military. Hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Please welcome Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld to the Feisworld podcast. So you're currently based in Nashville, Tennessee?
That's right. I've been in Nashville since 2010, coming up on 7 years this summer.
Wow. When I Googled your name, MGH just really doesn't want to give you up. It says Mass General Hospital, phone number, building, everything.
Yeah, it's the paper trail on the internet that never goes away entirely. But yeah, I left MGH in 2010 to take a position at Vanderbilt. I was basically recruited to create a research informatics division within the Department of Anesthesiology, and I've had the pleasure of building up that team over the last period of time. And I've taken on a number of other roles since I've been here at Vanderbilt.
Wow. So yeah, let's talk about, what made you move to Nashville and what are some of the progressions since then? 7 years, you build a team. What is that like?
Yeah, no. So I was not at all expecting to leave Boston. I was totally happy in my little fiefdom, as it were, my corner of the world at MGH. But my mentor got recruited to become the department chair at Vanderbilt, and I can remember being in his office, and he said, "What do you think about Nashville?" And I said, "Well, I've never been to Tennessee." I said, "I think as long as I don't tell people that I'm gay and Jewish in the same sentence, it'll be fine." And I have been just delighted at how easy the transition has been, at how warm and accepting everyone has been, and it's been probably one of the best things that I ever could have done, both personally and professionally for me.
Wow, I must say, I also sort of when I saw Nashville, Tennessee, and realized how open and transparent you're not only about your professional life but also your personal life. There was a kind of deeply embedded question to kind of ask, what has that experience been like? But it sounds like the transition was smooth. People were very friendly.
It has been, and one of the things that has been great for me professionally is just the spirit of collaboration that I have sort of found myself in. And I don't know if that's a Southern thing or if it's something unique to Vanderbilt, but it's been a wonderful part of my transition here, and certainly it has facilitated the success that I've been able to enjoy both in the research space as well as in other parts of my life. Science is a team sport, right? It's not about an individual doing something on their own, in a dark lab somewhere, particularly in clinical research, outcomes, health services kind of space. And I really, really feel lucky to have wonderful collaborators and support in the work that I'm doing.
I think the past 7 years has been quite something for you. A lot of things happened. As I was researching, reading Wikipedia, tell me about a little bit more about the 2014 to 15 military experience you had.
Yeah, it was a little unexpected. I joined the Navy sort of towards the end of my residency, and I always thought that if I deployed and went somewhere, I'd rather be on a ship than in the tent in the desert. And yet there I was in Afghanistan because it was a NATO trauma hospital that I was staffing. But the way that kind of things worked is it was a NATO facility and the Navy was providing the personnel to staff it. So even though it was sort of an Army-run joint base with NATO allies, there I was as a naval officer, an anesthesiologist in the SAM. One of the most challenging things I've ever done, certainly one of the most rewarding things. There are at least 3 service members that are home today with their families that would not be here if I hadn't been there. So that is a deeply satisfying thing to have been a part of. At the same time, it was really hard on my family. It's hard on me. I was very focused on the mission. I had something that I knew I needed to do. I was engaged in making sure that we were ready to handle what was coming. And yet my now husband, fiance at the time, was, sitting at home on the couch, wondering when I would call, waiting for, the phone to ring, not knowing when exactly he was going to hear from me. And so it's definitely hard on him. It's hard on the rest of my family as well. I think harder on them than it was on me, just because I had that sort of unit with me that I was a part of and very engaged in the task at hand. But while I was there, I got to do some incredible work, both as a physician as well as trying to do some advocacy for health in general. And I certainly value all those things.
I was going to ask, what are some of the similarities between serving inside NATO versus at a hospital such as Vanderbilt or MGH? But I guess a better question is, are there any similarities or more differences on the
You know,
ground?
the medicine doesn't really change, right? Human physiology is the same no matter, where you are in the world. But the equipment that we had available was the same sort of standard equipment that you would have in any major U.S. hospital, the same monitors, the same technology. We didn't always have everything that you would have in terms of capabilities, but because of where we were, the point in the war where I was serving, there was tremendous infrastructure that had been built up. The supply lines were fairly well established. And so by and large, we had most of the kinds of things that you would expect. We didn't have some of the advanced imaging technologies and those kinds of things, but we even had a CAT scanner that was available for us to use at this facility. And that's not always the case with all of the different places where care is provided out in the field. But for where I was, that was the experience that I had.
Wow. I feel like the support network may be slightly different. I notice in many articles that you're you are sort of the go-to. You are the expert. You couldn't, unlike MGH, you could call up someone, to have
Yeah.
support right away. Well, what was it like for you personally on the ground?
Well, we had a very small team of physicians that were with us. One of the challenges that our rotation had while I was there was because of the drawdown in the force. They actually had the same hospital staff with more people, more physicians, more nurses, more technicians. And so we were sort of in a transition period where they're trying to figure out how to maintain the same level of capabilities with a much smaller footprint because of the Department of Defense's efforts to get the total number of deployed personnel below 10,000 troops in theater at any one time. So there was kind of that component to the experience that was a little bit challenging. But I have to say, in spite of having a small number of people there, we were a highly functional unit. All my career, all my life as a physician, I've worked in teams as an anesthesiologist in the operating room. We work hand in hand with our surgeons and our nurses and our technicians. But when you are eating, living, sleeping in the same tent with the same people over and over and over, you develop a level of comfort and awareness of the people around you that you just don't get in any other setting. And it's really pretty profound. When I would be in the trauma bay and we would have a casualty brought to us, to see the level of experience that was brought to bear on any individual patient and the teamwork and collaboration was extraordinary. There are just very few circumstances where you would have 5 senior attending physicians simultaneously at the bedside caring for a patient anywhere in the world. At my hospital at Vanderbilt, you might have 1 or 2. You may have consultants coming and seeing the patient individually, but to have everybody there at the bedside all at once, bringing all of that knowledge and skill together, was really something that I've just never experienced prior to that, and I have experienced since. And it's certainly a unique thing and pretty incredible to see and be a part of.
The sleep together, literally in the same tent, eat together. I never thought about that. I never had a professional experience, right? We just go home and we come back, and nobody want to check their emails late at night, but sounds like the level of synergy can never be understated. And wow, I feel like it's almost, like you said, so profound that for anybody to even experience that, I think your life will never be the same, really.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and as I think about, the military certainly has brought a lot to civilian medicine in terms of our understanding about techniques and acute blood loss and the way that we can approach trauma surgery. But there's also a whole component around team-based care and interprofessional approaches to providing, the best that we can. That I think we still have a lot to learn from on the civilian side.
Mm-hmm. I when I interviewed a few guests who have been in military service, I noticed that sometimes they do tell me a lot of that experience they feel traumatized by certain moments. They find it hard to reflect, and I'm really thankful that you're able to. And I wonder, out of the 3 and many more people you helped, but 3 in critical condition who would have not reunited with their families if you weren't there, do you remember maybe one instance of what that scene was like, what that moment was like for you?
There are many instances of patients I took care of that I will never forget. And I remember, in fact, one of the most poignant things that I remember was a soldier, an Army soldier, who had been shot, who came in pretty beat up, and we took care of him. We got him in the operating room, got him stabilized, and I'll never forget watching him walk out of the hospital with his arm holding on to one of his battle buddies, but more or less of his own force being able to leave and go back, and I know that he would be back in the fight. He wasn't going back to the U.S. He was staying with his unit, and knowing that we were able to sort of help him and so many others maintain their ability to contribute to the mission was just incredibly rewarding. It was also equally sort of poignant and impressed in my mind some of those that did not survive, and we had incredible success at saving people, but not everyone. And those were challenging moments for all of us. I attended several funerals while I was overseas, remembrances of those that had fallen, and the bravery and courage that was witnessed and described to me by those who had served alongside those who had fallen was just extraordinary, and those actually are some of the memories that I know will stay with me for the rest of my life.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know it can be challenging. And what I find particularly intriguing is the fact that, in 2015, I learned that you were asking a question to, I believe at the time, 2015 Secretary of Defense.
Oh, yes.
And the moment I read that, I just imagined, I wish I could find that video of him being questioned that, and I want to see his response in real time. But even just by reading that was like enough for me. So tell me I want you to share the experiences.
Yeah, no. So shortly after I got to Afghanistan, one of the Air Force docs called me and said that they were sending an airman over that needed some assistance from the hospital. And she then said that this airman was transgender. And I was a bit surprised because at the time, there was a ban on transgender service, and the last place you would expect to find a transgender airman was deployed because of all of the reasons that you can imagine. And yet here was this person who showed up at our hospital. And so fortunately, he didn't actually need a whole lot of medical care, a little bit of assistance, and he was basically good to go. But I stayed in touch with him, and we kind of became friendly. And it became clear to me that here was just an incredibly courageous person who all he wanted to do was to be with his unit, handling the mission, and frankly was stressed by who was going to find out, how is it going to impact his career, was going to be able to stay and do what he'd been trained to do and to perform his job. And so a few months later, we had one of these kind of unannounced troop town halls, and the new Secretary of Defense, it was, I believe, his 6th day on the job, he had just been sworn in, arrived. I was present at that troop town hall, and this transgender airman was next to me, and I sort of recognized that literally this was a person who had no voice, right? Who could not stand up and ask about this issue because of the situation that he was in. And so I turned to him and I said, if you could ask any question, what would it be? And so I stood up and asked the Secretary of Defense in front of the press pool his thoughts on open transgender service in an austere environment like Kandahar, where we were in Afghanistan. And the Secretary gave a very favorable response. He apparently had not read the talking points. His staff should have given him. It was only day 6. So that led to some very positive steps at the time. The moratorium on discharge, the review and ultimate decision by the previous administration to end the ban on transgender service June 30th of 2016, a little over a year after I had the opportunity to ask that question while I was deployed.
It's not just the word open-minded could really cover it, but like you said, how courageous that is to step forward and to serve the country. And, that somehow is overlooked. And instead, people are focusing on, something, in my opinion, they're completely irrelevant. And there we are, and we're having this conversation, and it's just so refreshing and encouraging to hear that from someone like you. In addition to your military service, I noticed that you are a strong, advocator for LGBTI, for patient care, possibly for other physicians and doctors as well. So I want to learn more about, what you're doing today and really in the past decade.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, LGBTI health is just not something that historically has been taught in medical schools. And when I got to Vanderbilt, there was a desire on the part of our students to learn more, to be better prepared to serve patients. And so the school, the institution embraced that and said, we ought to be doing better. It's a disservice to our students and to our patients to not provide the right kinds of opportunities to integrate this content into our training programs. And so we went through kind of a systematic exercise of trying to figure out where we could integrate content into our existing curriculum. And we pretty quickly discovered that you can teach something in the classroom, but if you don't then model that behavior in the clinical learning environment, our clinics, our hospitals, then you won't be successful. And so it was not long after we embarked on some curricular reform efforts that we recognized we really need to start building our clinical programs. And so it was really that drove the creation of the Vanderbilt program for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex health. And the acronym is a bit of a sticky issue because patients know what LGBT means. NIH and others have moved to language that gets away from letters, and they talk about sex and gender minorities. But patients don't know what sex and gender minorities are. People on the street don't think of themselves as a sex or gender minority. So we've stuck with LGBTI, and we have a clinic for intersex or disorder or patients with differences of sex development at Vanderbilt. And so while intersex patients are quite different than transgender patients, a lot of the medical considerations are similar, and so is the expertise required to care for those patients. And so our programs decided at the outset, and we continue today, to include those patient populations and those that we are focused on.
I think you're really good at picking difficult subjects. I don't think most people can imagine what you have accomplished at a young age. And I couldn't print out your CV. It was literally 63 pages long. I had so many questions on many of these pages. But in particular, you are, in the medical fields, you are already seen as being very successful. And on top of that, you've picked a topic. It may be difficult to approach, maybe turning some people on or off. It's in a way, a quote unquote, not very safe topic for you to go after. How has that impacted your professional, personal life? And
great question. I mean, certainly LGBT health is definitely not as safe as calcium channel signaling or other research areas. But it's something I'm passionate about. And I made a decision early on that it was a place where I could have an impact and I needed to have an impact. And I do remember going to my department chair shortly after I got to Vanderbilt and having a very frank conversation with him and saying, there's an opportunity here and I really want to pursue this to work in the field of LGBT health. And without hesitation, he said, I will support you the entire way. And he has held true to that and made it much, I think, easier than it could have been if I were at a place where there wasn't that kind of support. Vanderbilt has a long history of advocating for equality And if you look at kind of steps it's taken as an institution, it's been very progressive and out in front of those issues for any institution, let alone an institution in the South. And I know our leadership has been very proud of the fact that we have really led on a lot of these issues. We were the second academic medical center in the country to have a program for LGBTI health, after the University of California, San Francisco, and we're very proud of that, and continue to be. There definitely have been moments in my political career where people have said to me, "This is going to prevent you from taking the next step, being successful." And I made a decision that if it was going to, that I would just have to deal with the consequences of that. And thus far, that has not been the case. I feel very lucky. I think, that when I was growing up and I came out at age 19, I didn't have a lot of role models to look to, successful out gay physicians who were making an impact. And so it's been, in some cases, challenging to figure out what that pathway is and what that looks like. And I hope that I've been able to be a role model for others. And certainly, I really love the opportunity to mentor trainees and students and other people in this work and field. And I think that that's really how we create change and get to a better place across the country.
Wow. I love just how daring that decision is. And I mean, this isn't any career change or impact to a career, medical fields and study. And it's just this long, drawn out, full commitment. Every doctor I interviewed said, you better love it wholeheartedly, because there's no turning back. I just love those moments. And I've spoken with many people on this podcast. I feel like I love going after people who make decisions that are sort of out of the ordinary, or a decision that many other people simply wouldn't choose. With that said, there's one area that I absolutely love, personally feel very strongly about, Lisa Leffert feels very strongly about, is coaching young physicians. And you are also young, which I find that probably very easy for them to relate to. But I heard things that, physicians after training, internship, by the time you come out of school, you're ready to be a doctor. You're often, I don't know, timeline-wise in your late 20s, 30, and you have still very little experience kind of interacting with the real world, even how to market yourself as a physician. So there are a lot of questions sort of unanswered that people are struggling with. Could you tell me a bit more about how your coaching and teaching goes in that domain area?
Yeah, no, I think that a couple of things that I always try to advise, others that I work with on is one is you have to find something that you're passionate about, or it's going to be impossible to have a 30 plus year career that's sustained and fulfilling, that doesn't lead to you being burnt out, if you don't really, really, truly love what you're doing. And I think a lot of people are multi-potential and they end up in a specialty or a field because of a mentor or some, rotation that they did. But that doesn't mean that people can't change direction. And I've seen a lot of very successful people, make decisions about changing direction. My primary, most longstanding mentor, was a basic scientist doing crystallography, and had very early success in that, had good NIH funding, and decided one day to basically hang that up and pivot into health services research and informatics, and then had a very successful career in kind of the operational management space, and has done some other interesting things totally different than where they started out. So I always try to tell people that I think it's important to keep an open mind, because you may have spent every ounce of energy up to a certain point focused in one area, but there may be something else that may be related, it may be synergistic, or it may be totally different. But I think it's important, particularly for early professionals, to sort of maintain that mindset. The other thing I always advise people is I really can't emphasize the level of importance of mentors. And, I have lots of mentors and lots of people that I look to for advice. And I really try to surround myself with people that can sort of help guide me. And, you don't always have to take your mentor's advice. But I really, really believe that getting a variety of perspectives on decisions that you're making is helpful. And that can be a very formal thing. It can be a very informal thing. And there are plenty of people that I have met along the way that I have stayed in touch with that, probably don't consider me their mentee. But I'll reach out to them from time to time or give them updates or ask them for advice. And I know that I get mentorship from them. And so things sometimes don't have to be labeled. But I think that recognizing that, surrounding yourself with bright, motivated, successful people is certainly something that I've tried to do. And I think that can be helpful.
I love that message. And I've seen it elsewhere outside of hospitals. And personally, for me, it's in marketing consulting, where how helpful that type of program can be, but oftentimes overlooked. People are now incentivized to be a mentor or a mentee, and then even as a mentor, as a role I played, I learned so much from the people that I interacted with. I know I mentioned age several times. I noticed there's something that I captured at the top. You were part of an organization or a speaker that I believe in Massachusetts that's been around for 228 years, and
yes.
you're the youngest.
The Massachusetts Medical Society. Yeah, no, I was elected vice speaker and then speaker, and I had the distinction of being the youngest person in that role in the 200-something year history of the organization. And that was in spite of doing work in LGBT health. and one of the fun things for me is that I was the vice speaker for 3 years, and then I became speaker. And when I was the vice speaker, the speaker of the society, who became a good friend and also mentor, Dr. Rick Peters, who is a radiation oncologist in Massachusetts. He and I graduated from the same high school, Andover, Phillips Academy, except he had graduated exactly 30 years before I had. And it was just a wonderful thing to work with him. And then the person who became my vice speaker and then ultimately speaker, he and I were at the same high school at the same time. And Dr. Dave Rosman, a radiologist in Boston, and he was a year ahead of me at Andover.
Wow. What was it like for you to maybe speak in front of an audience and, among other speakers, belong to the same organization and be someone who's so young? I mean, how does that make you feel? Do you feel that there's just this insane amount of pressure that's been put on you?
There definitely was a little bit of pressure. Fortunately, people really liked what I did, so that made it easier. I think I was pretty well received. But I think, like with anything else, whether you're young or old, white or Asian or Black, gay, trans, whatever, if you can prove yourself and you can do the work that you are assigned or set out to do, then those things shouldn't matter. And I really firmly believe that. Unfortunately, I think that underrepresented groups, those who have been marginalized by society, often find themselves in a position where they have to prove themselves to get the opportunity, to get that chance. And that's unfortunate. They're not given the benefit of the doubt the way that others are. For me, that's just made me work harder. And I found that, fortunately, I've been able to, have a successful career in a lot of different spaces. But that's been my kind of perspective on it.
You might not see yourself or might not even enjoy to be called an overachiever. And so looking at your profile, and for people outside of Massachusetts, Phillips Academy is, I would say, one of the most competitive schools in the country. And I know people graduate from there, from Commonwealth schools, sort of BBNNs, all within that network. I remember reading a story about a Chinese woman who graduated from Phillips, moved on to Harvard, and wrote an article about how easy Harvard seems to be for her. So what was that transition like? I want to talk about high school. I think it's such a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I will concur with that woman that I have never worked as hard in my life at any point. Not in college, not in medical school, not in residency, as I did when I was at Andover. It was intense. It was a time where I was incredibly focused. I was managing my time down to the minute, get everything done. But I walked away from that incredibly well prepared to do so much later in my life. And I feel incredibly indebted to the experience because I know that it set me up to be where I am today.
Wow. You know, a lot of millennials these days, as they're thinking about it, because a lot of the listeners are younger and some of them might never become doctors. Some of them may be particularly very interested in this path, not knowing what type of doctors they're going to become just yet. Some like to take time off or kind of explore other interests. What's your take on that? Because what I've heard recently is if they decide to take some time off, that might actually take away the opportunity or sort of the momentum they build from undergrad to medical school.
Yeah, it's hard to go back to school. People do it, but I have seen time and time again, whether it's advanced training after one is done and is in practice, to come back to school or go back and get another degree, or after you graduate college to then come back into a structured program, particularly if you're making some money and you've got kind of a life that you enjoy. Every year we have a number of kind of non-traditional students that don't go right into medical school from college at Vanderbilt. And I think that they bring a really helpful and unique perspective, but it can be challenging. When I was graduating from college, I had friends who were going to Wall Street, going to work for Goldman Sachs, investment banking and other kind of interesting things like that. And for a little while, I was kind of jealous. I was like, wow, they're getting to do all this cool stuff, and they've got like a real job, and they're making some money. And then when I got to medical school, I realized that suddenly I had all kinds of opportunities, both with individual people, a window into their lives, as well as beyond, that people just don't get without being a physician. And so my second year of medical school, I had an opportunity to go to China. And it was the China Medical Board of New York wanted to have a conference on the ethics of human subjects protections, and they were looking for a handful of U.S. medical students to come and to be a part of that. And so I kind of raised my hand and applied and was selected. And I got to go to China and have just an incredible cultural exchange to sort of hear and learn and participate about the different perspectives that people have on, how do we really engage patients in consent, and what does it mean to do medical research from that perspective. And those kinds of opportunities, whether it's in advocacy or service, have just never stopped since I became a medical trainee and now a physician. And so I'm no longer jealous of my friends. I have discovered that going through my training pathway has given me different opportunities, but opportunities that are just extraordinary beyond belief. And I really value that.
Wow.
Oh, I get asked a lot of questions sometimes from my mentees about work-life balance and family.
Oh, God.
Because it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for a lot of people because coming to work doesn't feel like work. I love it. I love what I do, and so making sure that I have some sense of making sure that things are where they need to be with the rest of my life is important. And so my husband and I talk about that fairly often. And we have not always gotten it right, but we've gotten to a really good spot with how we kind of communicate and manage that. Most days, I try to be home at 5 o'clock with my husband, and we take our dog for a walk, and we leave our cell phones at home. And for that hour, I know that we'll be there with each other, and no matter what happens afterwards or what happens before, we always have that time to kind of reconnect, and we do other things like that. But I think that making sure that there are mechanisms in place, regardless of whether you're married or have a significant other or not, to ensure that you can always kind of have that those restorative moments, because I think, frankly, those are kind of what sustain me and the rest of the work that I do.
I love that advice because it's very easy to engage. I think it's practical and also very achievable. I hoped I go to Nashville one day, and this just has been such an incredible experience for me talking to you, Jesse. I really
Should definitely come down. It's a great city and a lot to check out.
Yeah, for sure. A lot to learn. Well, thank you so much. Hey, it's Faye. I am back for a few words at the end of the show. I hope you enjoy what you heard. You can visit us online at feisworld.com, or social channels such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, also under Feisworld, to keep things simple. I personally review and respond to all the messages. Love to hear from you. Thank you, and lots of hugs. See you next week.